customer service, done right, can be your company's single biggest competitive advantage. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution. Join customer service authority and best-selling author John DiJulius as he interviews leaders who are revolutionizing their industries. This is more than a podcast, though. It's a movement. The Customer Service Revolution is a radical overthrow of conventional business mentality designed to transform what customers and employees experience. If you're a revolutionary customer service leader who's ready to stop competing on price and obsessed with building a brand that people cannot live without, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution podcast with John DiJulius. In this week's episode, John brings back Murray. Dave Murray, that is, Senior Customer Experience Consultant for the DiJulius Group. They'll be speaking about Commandment 10 of the DiJulius Group's methodology, world-class leadership. In this episode, you'll learn how to create a world-class internal culture that only attracts, hires, and retains the people who are capable of upholding the service vision of the organization, how to ensure you're walking the talk, how every world-class customer service organization is world-class to work for, and how it takes world-class leadership to provide the passion, inspiration, and discipline to all employees. Now here's your host, John DiJulius.
Hello, revolutionaries. Welcome to another episode of the Customer Service Revolution, episode number 50, and I'm joined with Senior Customer Experience Consultant of the DiJulius Group, Mr. Dave Murray, a.k.a. Murray, the Merster. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, John. It's great to be here today. Thanks so much for having me on again. And before we start, I just want to say congratulations, because I missed it because I was out of town, but I heard that Believe in Dreams had another fantastic golf outing this year. So congratulations on a job well done.
Yeah, one of our sister companies is a nonprofit making dreams come true for kids who've suffered severe hardship. So that was great. 50. What do you think of number 50, Dave, when I say 50?
A recent birthday of mine?
Yes, the big 50. So 50 is a good milestone for the Customer Service Revolution. And I'm really excited about today's podcast because it's on our 10th commandment of our 10 commandments, world-class leadership. And I like to say our commandments 1 through 10 go in a certain order, but this I don't like to think of as number 10. It's kind of the netting to all our commandments. And it is so critical. What's felt on the inside will be delivered on the outside. So Dave, you've done this presentation workshop for our consulting clients and great brands all over the world, more than anyone on our team. So introduce what the world-class leadership workshop looks like.
I'd be happy to. And it's such an important one. And here's why. The best way to explain what we work on and look to accomplish in this workshop is to create a playbook for our leaders, our managers, to manage within the culture we're trying to create. And why that is so important, if you think of your own organization right now, so many organizations out there do not have any soft skill training for managers, right? People typically get promoted into that management role because they did their jobs well, not because someone saw innate leadership qualities in them. It was just they did their job well and they were given a team and asked to continue doing their job well while leading the team. And there's very little training out there in a lot of organizations on how to then support that team, be there for that team, and truly lead that team. So one of the things that we really focus on is creating those soft skills so that our leaders are focused on building relationships with their team members and focused on supporting their team members based on their knowledge of their goals, which typically isn't in existence in a lot of organizations. So for me, it's really, really important. It's kind of to get to that next level of being a great leader. And again, it's missing in so many companies.
And I would assume it's so timely today with the great resignation that's going on, and turnover is at record high, and unemployment is so hard to fill. That two things. One, this is so critically important. But another thing is, don't wait till they become leaders to start training them to be leaders.
That's a great point, John. We have a couple of clients of ours that have gone through this process that then offer the deliverables from this, the playbook on how to lead. They offer that as a continuing education class within their organization. And if you want to get promoted to a manager or a supervisor, one of the prerequisites is that you have to take this class first. So they offer it so that people can learn how to be better, but they do need to have this class under their belt before they take that next position. So there's so many great things you can do with this. And another thing to mention too about the importance of this, John, not only based on the fact that, as you mentioned, the great resignation, so many people are leaving their jobs, looking to go elsewhere. It's really an employee's market. But the other thing is, as your teams are moving to that virtual world, not just a temporary pivot for COVID, but in a lot of cases, what's going to be a permanent pivot to at least a hybrid world of virtual and in person, and so maybe all virtual in some cases. These tools, these strengths are more important now than ever before to really build that relationship with your team, to nurture a team and support a team.
Well, good. Let's get into it, Dave. What do we do in this workshop? What do you do when you do this workshop for existing and aspiring leaders?
Well, the place we start that I love is an icebreaker exercise that we do where we ask participants in the workshop to think about some of the most impactful memories or experiences in their career. Maybe it's winning an award, getting a shout out, getting that recognition, whatever. And then we ask another question. We say, who's impacted you the most? And how did they do that? And in their career. And why this icebreaker is so eye-opening is people start to realize that a lot of times that most impactful moment might have been a simple hallway conversation, or it might have been a simple call out for a job well done in a meeting. And so it makes us realize as leaders how important our words are, right? So what could be a simple hallway conversation to us could be an impactful moment for that person on the other end of that conversation. So it's just a great reminder of how impactful we can be as leaders in our words and in our actions. And so that we always need to be focused on that. So we start there to really get people thinking about how impactful they actually are after they move into that leadership role. So that's a great place for us to start.
Let me go back to it real quick. How impactful they are as leaders, or how impactful leaders were to them in their career?
Great question. It's a little bit of both, right? Because we have them think back to who impacted them.
Right.
But then we talk about what was the setting of that impactful moment, right? Was it at a keynote speech at a dinner where someone said, I'm gonna impact John DiJulius today? Probably not. It was probably just a conversation where that leader said something, but it had a meaningful impact on you. So then we turn the lens internally and say, okay, think about the times where you could have this impact on your team members. And it could just be walking down the hallway. It could be in a simple staff meeting where you say something, how impactful that actually can be. Again, because you have that leadership title.
All right, good. All right.
So when we do the world-class leadership session, we're looking to accomplish a few things. Like I mentioned already, create that playbook so people understand how to lead within this culture that we're creating of being a great CX organization. We want to make sure that we're creating accountability for leaders to lead, right? That we have some accountability platform in place so we know that they're doing their jobs well. We know that if we do this successfully, it will increase morale amongst our teams. It also goes hand in hand with that. It will reduce turnover, which is hugely important today. And then we also want to attract, hire, and retain service-minded team members, right? We want to find the right people and bring them to our organization. And John, one of the things that we talk about at the beginning of this workshop is our purpose as an organization at the DiJulius Group, which is to create a customer service revolution. Wherever we go, whether we're working with a client, giving a keynote speech, whatever it is, create a customer service revolution. And we have a definition of what a customer service revolution is. I'm not going to cover the entire definition. As a matter of fact, a lot of our listeners probably know it forwards and backwards already. But what I do want to touch on is the first paragraph of that definition because it's so important. The first paragraph of our definition of a customer service revolution is a radical overthrow of conventional business mentality designed to transform what employees and customers experience. And I think that's a really important thing to touch on when we're talking about world-class leadership, because the word employees is in there for a very important reason. And it actually comes before customers for a very important reason, right? A lot of times when an organization gets excited about customer experience, and maybe it's the new initiative of the year, they get all excited about pleasing customers, and they kind of forget about the people who actually have to do that pleasing, who have to deliver it. But they're the most important element of it. So what this workshop is all about is making sure that we're identifying, supporting our folks that are truly providing that experience to our customers. And as leaders, we're supporting them so they can do that to the best of their ability. And that's why it's so important.
Totally agree. I couldn't agree more with you, Dave. It starts on the inside with us walking our talk. And one of my favorite quotes to this is, go show the proper way, and when necessary, use words, right? So be a world-class leader.
You know who said that quote?
No.
St. Ignatius of Loyola.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
So the other thing that we remind people of, and again, if you've been a part of the DiJulius group, listening to our podcasts, coming to the Customer Service Revolution, you know that we talk about this. You know that we talk about what's more important when hiring folks. Is it the people that you actually hire, or is it the culture that you bring them into? And while they're both very, very important, we always go with culture, right? We always go with the training and culture you're bringing them to. You got to remember, these leaders are the people that are actually creating that culture. They have to realize it. They're just not showing up and doing their jobs. They are actually creating the culture in which all of our team members have to work and live and provide the experience we're looking to create. So it's a really, really important reminder to our leaders how crucial they are, just beyond the things they normally think of, right? Hitting their number, their budgets, whatever is their tangible goals are, that these things are just as important, if not more important. And, John, one of the things that we touch on in this workshop, I was going to throw it to you, is really based on what one of your good friends, Mark Moses, says about energy.
Yeah, Mark is the president and founder of CEO Coaching. In his book, Make Big Happen, I love this. He says, are you a CEO? And his definition of a CEO is Chief Energizing Officer. And obviously that could be apply to all of us. You don't have to be an executive at a company. You could be a stay-at-home mom or dad, or a student. And we should all be working. I love that word energy. I think there's two types of leaders, probably two types of people, energy givers and energy suckers. So, let's focus on the energy givers. They raise the confidence of everyone they come in contact with. They constantly show gratitude and thanks. They give everyone else the credit. They don't need the kudos. They believe in others. They're there for others when they struggle or are going through hard times. They're their employees' biggest cheerleaders. They find out what their employees' goals are, and they help them achieve it. And sometimes that might not have to do with present day company. It might be their long-term goals, and that could be getting out of this industry. They're great listeners. They're willing to walk through a fire for those on their team, and they really practice what they preach. So those are some examples of just energy givers. And then the other word I really like is encourage. And when I was writing the relationship economy, I came across the something on encourage. And I've always liked the word, but it's never stood out any more than a lot of a million other words until I read the Greek translation for encourage is to make strong. And I started thinking about that, encourage, right? And in courage, to put courage in. I mean, that is really what I think as leaders, that's our number one responsibility, is to put courage in others. It would make them feel that they can do anything as a result of the trust and the belief that a leader has in them. And it kind of starts with your icebreaker, Dave. Who did that for you in your career, and how can you do that for other people?
Yeah, and I love that thought. I never thought of encourage that way until I first heard you talk about flipping the word around, encourage in, and that's really what you're doing. And that's so important, and such a great thought of what we're working on in this particular workshop when we're working with our clients, because that's really what this is all about. And as I mentioned at the top, this workshop is really about creating that playbook so our leaders understand how to lead within this culture that we're trying to create. Because we've all seen it, right? A company may focus on a big customer experience initiative, but they don't change their culture. They don't do anything on top of just create the content, and then it falls flat and they don't understand why. Well, the culture has to support what you're trying to do. It has to be part of who you are as an organization. And so this workshop is really focused on doing just that, making sure that your leaders understand how to practice what we preach. All those things that you mentioned as the quality of energy givers, giving them the knowledge and the opportunity to do just that. And some of you might be saying, well, why do we really need to do that? We're paying these people, they're coming in and they're doing their job. Shouldn't they just do that because it's their job? And I could see your point, but the reality is, we all need to be encouraged. We all need to feel appreciated, and leaders need to do that. And there's a couple of statistics that I want to share that are really kind of eye-opening when it comes to our team members, and a little scary too. So Bain & Company, the great research firm based in Boston, did this study a few years ago. They analyzed 200,000 employees. This was a global study. This wasn't just here in the US. This was a global study of employees. And they were really looking at engagement, employee engagement across these organizations. A couple of the findings that they had, which were pretty interesting. The first one was that engagement scores tend to drop the longer you're around, right? The longer your tenure. So if you think about that for a minute, your folks that probably have the most knowledge, the most experience, might start to become the least engaged within your organization. They're probably also those that are leaders by example, or the team members that others go to with questions because they have that knowledge, but their engagement level might not be matching their knowledge level if you're not careful and focused on that. The other thing that the study found was engagement scores decline as you continue down the organization chart, which makes perfect sense, but we as organizational leaders don't always think that way. And so think in your own organization for a moment. Did you ever have an idea that senior leadership thought was fantastic, but when you rolled it out to the rest of the teams, it kind of fizzled? Well, it may not be that it wasn't a great idea. It may just be that the engagement level didn't match, right? So we have to be focused on engaging all of our folks wherever they are in the organization. And then the scariest thing that came out of this study is that engagement scores were the lowest when it came to our service and sales providers, right? So the people that were dealing with our customers the most also wound up having the least amount of engagement over time. But when you think about it, that one makes pretty good sense too, because they're the ones out there that are getting beat up. They're the ones being told no all the time. They're the ones that are having to put out the fires, deal with the issues, right? So they're the ones kind of on those frontline battles, so to speak. So again, if we're just saying, come and go do your jobs, we're not providing them the support to be successful and to support them with the help they need, then their engagement is going to drop. So the focus on engagement is so important. But again, so many organizations don't take the time to purposely have that focus. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah, you brought up so many good points. The employee engagement scores declining with tenure. I've seen that firsthand, painfully. And what I like to refer to as the middle child syndrome, right? Like we're all about the new employee and how much progress they're making in their first 3 months, 6 months, a year. And then, you have the long term that are crushing it or made it into leadership or, are the rock stars. But you get the people that have been here 3 years, 7 years, who we kind of forget about, right? Because we're so busy hand-holding the newer and celebrating the so-called rock stars, that whether it's the attention we're not giving them, but it's also the carrots to keep them engaged, motivated, educated, seeing that they have empowerment, seeing that, that their opinions and feedback matter, and there's still a career path for them even after 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point, John. The realization that we have to provide that support for everyone, because even our folks that kind of are in that middle lane, if you will, and maybe not the rock star, maybe not the newest, they still are performing important duties as well. They are still having impact on our customers in their job function. And so we need to make sure that we are supporting them to the best of our ability. And quite honestly, if they're not doing those things, if they're not impacting our customer experience, then maybe they're not in the right role to begin with. But we need to be providing support for for all of those team members. And one of the great things about this study from Bain is they didn't just tell us the problems, they also gave us some solutions. And one of the things that came out of this is that supervisors and managers really lead this engagement, right? So it's not the CEO giving a big speech and firing everybody up. Not that that's bad. Those are good things. It's not a VP or the HR department going around and giving out cards on your birthday. Those are good things too. But to really drive engagement, it's that supervisor manager, the person that I report to directly really drives that. And that's why this workshop is so important, because we create some tools to help your team members do just that. Be focused on driving that engagement, because the reality at the end of the day, we talk about this all the time, the statistics say that the single most important determinant of an individual's performance and commitment to stay within an organization is, John, I'll throw it to you.
The relationship that employee has with his or her immediate leader.
You know, it's so amazing as we're going across the country, the globe, doing workshops. People don't realize that. A lot of people have not heard that before. And it's such an important part of being a leader, them understanding the impact that they have on that person's ability to do their job, how well they're going to do their job, how long they're going to stick around. And very often it's not a focus of people in management positions, and it's so important.
Dave, I know you've heard me talk about this. Avoid being a Disney leader. And I'm not talking about beating up Disney. Disney's great, but there's a term, everyone's familiar with it, is Disney dad. And I believe the reference is, it might be divorced parents, and I don't want to disparage fathers, but I believe that the term is the mothers, running them to practice and school and all that. And then when the dad gets him, he may take him on a trip to Disney, and dad's the greatest guy in the world, and he's fun, right. And mom is always nagging at us. And so, I related that to being a Disney leader. And, I've even been guilty of this, where we make a big splash once a year. We take all our employees, all our companies to this 5-star resort that just blows their mind. And then we expect that to be to last for the next 12 months. And that's being a Disney leader in a way of, that's nice. They certainly like that, but that doesn't really build any employee equity or retention. It is what you're describing, what you will describe, of coming up, recognizing someone for a job well done, knowing something about them. My son, Bo, he's going into a senior year of high school, and he's working in a factory, and it's a tough job, and every day he comes home, he wants to quit. And then last week he was kept on texting me that some manager he's doing a really good job. And the next day told him again, and then he got in the car. He came up to me and said, "I can tell you were raised really well." And so not only Bo was happy, I was happy with that. And
yeah,
but
right.
I couldn't believe the change in him. He wants to, work more than 3 days this week. And it's the same job, same factory, same everything, but just that someone is paying him a little attention, giving him compliments. You see it, and it's stuff that, we take for granted.
Yeah. And, that's a great point. We need to make sure that our leaders understand that's part of their job, right? That whoever went up and encouraged Bo, that's part of his or her responsibility within that organization. When they see something good happening, to let the person know, "Hey, you're doing a great job, Bo. I'm glad you're here." And the reality is, a lot of times leaders take that for granted, and they don't express that, or they don't feel they have the time, or it's not their place, whatever
Right.
it is. And they let those opportunities go by the wayside. And then when people are discouraged and they leave, we ask why, and we didn't take those opportunities. So one of the things that we do with our clients, and we focus on in this particular workshop when we're holding it, is how can we make this part of the role, right? How do we make this part of their job? And one of the great ways that we do that are what we call one-on-one meetings. And so a lot of organizations are focused on one-on-one meetings, whatever the cadence is, whether it's weekly, if you can swing it, whether it's monthly, but making sure that part of the accountability of being a leader is that you are meeting with your individual team members on a weekly basis, monthly basis, whatever it is, and you're having those important conversations. You're asking how you can support them. You're talking about areas of opportunity. You're talking about where they want to go next in the organization. You're giving them kudos when it's appropriate. All those important things. And it's the organization really making sure that the leader knows that it's part of their job, and also making sure they have the time to do it, right? Because one-on-ones are great, but if you go to your leaders and say, hey, great news, everybody, next week we're starting one-on-one meetings, make sure you do these every week. Well, what's the likelihood that's going to happen unless you're helping budget the time to fit those in, right? Because they can be time consuming, but they're so important. So one of the things that we do when we're working with our clients or as part of this workshop is help them create a template for leaders to follow, so they really understand what this meeting is all about. Because it's not just getting a team member in and telling them where they can be better or what you want them to do the next week or month, whatever it is, but it's also getting their feedback and learning what they feel are their strengths and where they feel they can improve, and really letting them have a big piece of that meeting and share with you their thoughts on their role in the organization. So if you're thinking about utilizing one-on-one meetings, which I would wholeheartedly endorse, having a template and teaching your team members how to do it is really, really important. It's kind of like huddles, as a lot of listeners know. When we work with a client, we introduce huddles as a way to reinforce some of the content we're creating. You can't just tell a leader, go hold a huddle, without showing them how to do it, because people have different understandings of what that looks like. Same with this meeting. So to be able to give your leaders a template to follow, a guide of how to conduct these very important meetings with their team members, it's so important. And on top of that, it's also a great opportunity for leaders to be collecting forward. And John, I'll let you share for everyone what Ford is. I'm sure most of our listeners already know.
Yeah, Ford is what people geek out about, and it stands for Family, Occupation, Recreation, and Dreams. And at least one or two of those, if not all of them, you find out casually, naturally with someone, organically, you could really get their hot buttons. I before we started this podcast, I made the mistake of asking you about Will's baseball season, and we almost ran out of time today.
Right. It was a good season, so I had a lot to say.
You did.
Join John, Murray, and the rest of the DiJulius group as they host this year's Customer Service Revolution Conference. Tickets are on sale now for the 2-day event, filled with an amazing lineup of speakers. Visit customerservicerevolution.com for details.
These one-on-one meetings can be such a great place for leaders to be collecting that information. And as we always say, it's not an interrogation. It's just having a conversation. And these things come out of conversations. It's actively listening and gathering that information and using it. So it's really just a great opportunity to build a supportive relationship within that working environment. And so we want to make sure that our leaders are trained on how to do that and are then focused on doing that, because we know that, as we mentioned earlier, the relationship that they build with their team member is really such an important determinant on how long they're going to stay with us and how well they're going to do in their roles. So it's really, really an important thing to focus on. The next thing I wanted to talk about, John, too, we kind of go next in this workshop, is a focus on turnover, because some people are bought in by now at this point of the workshop. Yeah, this is important. We gotta spend a lot of energy. Sometimes we still have some naysayers and say, yeah, why are we doing this though? I mean, people should just show up and do their jobs and take their paycheck. But we need to look at turnover and how important that is, right? And one of the really important things about turnover is the cost of turnover, right? And what turnover does.
Yeah, and that is something obviously quantifiable, and you can show what that costs. But the invisible cost is a couple different things. Is, now I got a bunch of new employees who don't know their job that well, that are interacting with our clients, and they're not making them feel like VIPs because they don't know that they're VIPs. But the other invisible cost is what the turnover does to existing employees, right? If everyone's leaving, you start questioning, am I the, only idiot, and now your good friends that you've gotten to know aren't there anymore, and you're working with a bunch of strangers, and that can become annoying too when everyone around you is incompetent, mostly because they're new, and you have to stop and teach everyone, and you're not being productive at your job. But yeah, I mean, even what is quantifiable is a scary number.
Yeah, I mean, the cost itself, right? The dollars that goes towards turnover is staggering, right? So if if a team member of yours leaves, typically on average, you're looking at about half of their annual salary to replace them, right? For a typical employee. If a rock star leaves, if one of your best employees leaves, you're looking at 2 times their annual salary potentially to replace them, right? So those dollars really add up. Having issues with turnover goes way beyond morale issues. Obviously, it affects the customer experience, but it costs dollars, real dollars. So it's such an important thing to focus on. And one of the things that I really like about this workshop is we use turnover numbers to help us focus on where we need to build tools for our leaders. So we look at an organization's turnover numbers, when people are leaving, what departments they're leaving from, why they're leaving, all those factors to help guide us in the process of building some tools where that turnover is happening so that we can lessen that turnover from happening in the future.
That's important because not every company experiences turnover in the same point in an employee's life, right? And it's dependent on the type of industry and that. So what company A, let's say they have 25% turnover or 50% turnover, whatever it is, but the majority of that turnover could be happening in 1 or 2 key spots in an employee's career. When we talk about employees' life cycle is first 90 days, 6 months, year, 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and 10 plus. So you got to really run your reports to find out of the turnover. One thing is you have turnover, then of the turnover you're happening, what categories, what timeline is it falling into? And then you could usually find out why. Like I expressed, a common one is the middle child syndrome. And we started finding that if we kept someone longer than 5 years, they stayed forever. But, we were losing people between 2 and 5 years in one of our businesses. And then when we, dug deeper, we totally found out why. We totally just weren't putting in things into place to keep them engaged.
John, you brought up the point how it can be so different for different organizations. Another great example is I've worked with a few companies where they were having problems at that first 90-day mark. So someone's going through their onboarding, kind of that probationary period of 90 days, of 1 quarter on the job. And I've worked with a couple of organizations where that was a big pain point for them. They were losing people, but for different reasons, right? Sometimes it's because they can't wait to get the new person on board, so they throw everything at them but the kitchen sink, and that employee's feeling overwhelmed and helpless. And so they're looking for something else, looking for somewhere else to go. And I've also heard that sometimes the organization may be unorganized or not have a great onboarding process, and that person feels alone. That person feels like they aren't doing enough. They're not contributing. They're not valued, and they leave for those reasons.
Your most ignorant employee, your dumbest employee, lack of it, is your newest employee, at no fault of their own, right? They don't know where the bathroom is. They don't know where the Band-Aids are. They don't know hardly anything. And it could be one of two things. We could be with a fire hose, which isn't productive, or like too many companies do, we're so short-staffed that we just throw you out there, and next week we'll train you like we should, and next week never comes because next week we're still short-staffed. Right. So now you're getting beat up by customers because you don't know what you're doing. You're making mistakes. You're getting beat up by coworkers because they're asking you for help, and you can't help them. And this job sucks. And
right.
It's not them. It's not they have bad morale. It's at start. So each stage of that employee's life cycle has nuances.
It sure does. And sometimes that's organization to organization. Sometimes it's department to department within organizations. Right. So we really want to strive to make sure that you as an organization are providing that consistent experience, whether it's onboarding, whether it's you finishing up your second year here, regardless of who your leader is, regardless of what department you are working in, because that's so important, right? We don't want one department to shine and do all these supportive, great things for their team members and others to suffer because they're not experiencing the same thing. So one thing we do in this workshop to help make sure that that's not happening is we identify how we as an organization celebrate things like anniversaries or excellent performance, either as an individual or a team, or other significant milestones. And we make sure that we are doing that consistently across the organization. So very often in this workshop, we may hear best practices from one department over here and one department over here. And people are like, that's a great idea. I never heard that before. So there might be things happening within your own organization that could be replicated throughout the entire organization, right? If we just communicate about those and talk about them and then put them into practice, give our leaders the knowledge and the wherewithal to go ahead and do those things. So that's a really important piece of this. And some of the examples that we give, John, to sing your praises when we're doing this workshop are the example from John Robert Spa, your first business, of how leaders once a year go to every one of the locations and they wash the cars of every team member. And it's a simple thing. It's a day out of their busy year as leaders, but it's grown into something that has become significant and important to team members of the organization, right? So sometimes the solutions are simple things like that
they
that
love
can be
seeing
happening.
their boss out there and they're like, hey, you missed a spot. We also don't like to tell them when we're coming because they'll go off-roading the night before.
Right. But so part of this exercise is having a very frank conversation with the leaders in that room. What could we be doing? What could we be doing to provide a better experience to our team members? Because at the end of the day, we have to remember that our culture as an organization reflects leadership. So your organizational culture is going to reflect the leaders that are at the top of that culture. And one of the things that I like to always say about culture is it's going to happen. Whether you work on it or not, it's going to exist. So you might as well put some effort in to make it a good culture because you're going to have a culture one way or the other. And we also have to remember that our customers will never be any happier than our employees are, right? Because they can feel dissatisfaction. Customers can feel those issues. And we can't expect our employees to turn on that smiley face and bring a great experience if they're not receiving that on their own.
Both quotes I love, Dave. The culture reflects leadership is so true. I hate it because sometimes I'll find myself driving home or getting out of a meeting with my teams, and I'll be like, oh my God, I have the worst team ever and their morale sucks. And what is wrong with them? And then I always go back to that stupid quote. And then I think about, all right, culture reflects leadership, not in this case, but let me just, so I'm not a hypocrite. And then when I think about it, I can draw why morale's down. I could see, I haven't been around, or if I've been around, I really haven't been around mentally, or I've just been a taskmaster saying, why haven't you? And where's this? And I've been an energy sucker. And then, the same with customers will never be any happier than your employees. I mean, that is, there's no truer words spoken. If you're not happy with your customers, look at where your employees are.
Yeah, it's such a great point. We always have to look internally before we can start to look externally. And along those lines, we also incorporate a great study from Harvard Business Review.
This is one of my favorites, Dave. I don't know how you do it, but I love to ask this question, are you a bad boss? And then I think that was the title of it. Sorry to jump in there, from Harvard Business Review. And it's like, no, I'm not a bad boss, because what's the first thing we think of when we think of the old paradigm boss? What do you think of?
Like a taskmaster, right? And just
screaming in your face, yelling, Bobby Knight or whoever you want to think of. I'm like, no, I don't berate my employees and scream and profanity at them. So I checked that box. But what this article said was, no, that's not a bad boss. Hopefully that person doesn't even exist today. But share what a bad boss is.
So the way they derived this information is they did a study of people that left organizations or had complained that they had a bad boss, and they did a survey and compiled why they said that, what led them to be thinking that way. And so the list of things starts with the boss failed to inspire, right? So they were just hoping that people would come in and do their jobs, and there wasn't any inspiration as part of their day to day. That's a big one. Also, the boss did not deliver a clear vision or direction, right? So people kind of felt like maybe they were aimlessly floating through this job. Maybe sometimes the direction kept switching, right? The priorities kept switching weekly or daily, whatever that looks like. And so people start to feel that, lose that feeling of a clear direction. Failure to walk the talk is a big one, right? So do as I say, not as I do. That's not going to get you very far as a leader. And a failure to develop others. This one's interesting, but it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes when it comes to internal culture, which is, the day I hire someone is the day that I go to work for them, right?
I love that quote.
Are you helping your team members achieve their goals, get to the next spot? And too often, unfortunately, leaders might be a little selfish, right? And be thinking, well, I can't have John leave my team because then my team will suffer, but not doing what's in the best interest for John or helping John get to where he wants to go. So that's an important one. And then to me, one that stands out, it's the last one and probably stands out the most, is acceptance of mediocre performance, right? Because once you accept that mediocre performance, that's your new bar, right? Once you let someone get away with something that's not where the level needs to be, your A team members are going to reach that same bar as well, because they're going to see that it's okay. And I think what's important with this is reminding ourselves that I don't think there's a lot of bad bosses out there, but the reality is we all get busy. We all get pulled in different directions. And so we can easily take our eye off the ball of these 5 things and not delivering these to our team members. So it's important to keep these as a priority.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that last one, mediocre performance, it even surprised me the first time I ever read it, because you kind of think employees work in their own bubble, but employees want to be great. They want to get better, and they don't want to work with C players. A players hate working with B and C players, and nothing will ruin their morale faster is when you surround them and tolerate and compromise.
Right. They want to be on a good team.
Right. So I think from here, Dave, you usually create internal nevers and always. Is that correct?
So yeah, John, internal nevers and always is a great tool that we help organizations create. Some of them may already have external nevers and always for their customers that all of their team members are following. But we come back and we look at focusing on the internal side of things and things that we want our leaders to never or always do, behaviors we want our leaders to never or always be delivering. Sometimes we call them simply the do's and the don'ts, right? Do this as a leader, don't do this as a leader. And quite honestly, they could be sometimes as simple as reminding people not to reprimand in public, but go ahead and praise publicly while making sure that you're reprimanding privately. So a lot of times they can be quite simple, but if we're not bringing them to people's attention, they may not be happening consistently across the organization. So creating a list of do's and don'ts as leaders, or nevers and always as leaders, is really a great exercise to make sure that from a very high level, that all your leaders are focused on delivering a consistent experience to all your team members across the organization.
And one, I love, Dave, that I think is so taken for granted or undervalued, but not by employees, but by leadership's actions is follow up, right? If an employee asks you about something, let me find out and get back to them, and tell them when you're going to get back to them, and make sure you do that.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's so simplistic, but the reality is we all have long lists of things to do. We all have checklists that we're trying to go through and check off every day as we're doing our jobs. And sometimes something as simple as follow up or go and praise publicly, if it's not a high priority, it can fall off of our list of things to do. So it's really just making sure that as an organization, we don't let that happen.
One really simple exercise on leaders is a 3-question survey, which is, on each leader have their employees fill out. And it's really what employees really care about. One, rate score on a scale of 1 to 5. This leader cares about the company. The second question is score 1 to 5. This leader cares about my success. And then the third one is this leader cares about me as a person. And it's real easy. It's real quick. You immediately find if you're probably less than a 4.5, you got some work to do and you know where, right? Because we can care about the company. We can care about 2 or 3 of these. We can care about your success, but maybe that's because your success leads to my success. and that's kind of a hidden agenda, right? So really making sure that all three is a very good thing to be graded on.
Yeah, I love that. And again, consistently across the entire organization. You're going to have some leaders that are naturally good at those three things, kind of those natural born leaders. But there are going to be some others that need to put some effort in there. That's not maybe part of their personality. So they're going to have to focus on being consistent and being purposeful at those things. So that's a really important reminder. So John, that's really an overview of a high level overview of what this workshop is all about. There's a lot more that we cover. And I know that we might have some of those topics in future podcasts, such as the interview process, which we cover here. And there's so much more that we can get into. But we really wanted to give a high level overview of what this is all about. Hopefully some nuggets that you can think about and maybe start to look at your own organization and make some positive changes, whether it's yourself, your own department, or organizationally wide. But I did want to end on three of my favorite quotes when it comes to world-class internal culture. The first one is from Zig Ziglar when he says, "You don't build a business, you build people. And then the people build your business." That could be for a business leader. That could be for a department head, right? Building a department or running a department is the same as really building a business in a lot of ways. You need to have your people go out and do that for you. So I really feel that's such a great quote. The next one is not credited to anyone, but it's such a great quote. "Being a leader doesn't require a title, and having a title doesn't make you a leader." And I think sometimes we have some leaders out there that forget that just having that title of VP or manager or whatever it is doesn't make you a leader. You really have to walk and talk and live up to that and support your team. And then finally, probably my most favorite quote when it comes to internal culture is from Sir Richard Branson, the serial entrepreneur and new astronaut, when he said, "Train people well enough so they can leave, treat them well enough that they don't want to," which really encompasses everything we talked about today.
No, you got that right, Dave. This was just an awesome podcast. You shared so many good things that we forget, need to be reminded, need to create a system so it doesn't get forgotten about. It becomes a daily, weekly activity, top of mind, and some good stuff that you introduce some really good new material. So I think this is so important in everyday business life, but especially what businesses and around the globe are experiencing right now with, they're calling the Great Resignation. And the Great Resignation is probably a result of what you were doing 6 months to 2 years ago that now you're feeling it. And we got to get back on and take care of our employees and the culture and make them feel really, really good. So Dave, another amazing podcast. Thank you, Revolutionaries, for joining us for the World Class Leadership Podcast. And we can't wait to see you next week.
Thanks for listening in. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. To hear more, be sure to subscribe to the Customer Service Revolution podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being part of the Customer Service Revolution.